Hello and welcome to this lab demonstration on vSphere storage vMotion migrations. After completing this lab video, you will be able to migrate virtual machine files from one storage to another while the virtual machine is running. There are several situations where you want to change the data store of a virtual machine. For example, when you want to perform maintenance tasks on a data store, when the currently used data store gets full, or when you want to use a data store that has better performance. You might wonder, can I change the data store of a virtual machine while the virtual machine is running? Or do you have to shut down the virtual machine, move the files, and then power the virtual machine on again? Actually, just like you can move a live virtual machine to another ESXi host to change the compute resource, you can also change the data store of a running virtual machine by using storage vMotion. How does storage vMotion work? When you migrate the virtual machine files from a source data store to a destination data store, the files get copied, and once that is done, vSphere switches to the new files. By the way, if the two data stores reside on the same storage array, then files may get copied internally within that storage array, even without being sent across a storage network. This only works if the storage array supports the vSphere API for Array Integration, or VAAI. With VAAI, vSphere simply instructs the storage array to migrate the files. If VAAI is not supported, or if the source and destination data store reside on different storage arrays, then files get copied over a storage network. If you are not sure whether or not VAAI is supported by your storage array, have a look at the storage devices, select the LAN and check what it says in the hardware acceleration column. If it says supported there, then you have VAAI. Another thing you should be aware of, you cannot migrate files of a disk that is in non-persistent mode. Only dependent disks, these are disks that support snapshots, or independent disks that are in persistent mode can be storage vMotioned. And finally, there is another nice feature of storage vMotion. You can change the disk provisioning type, so you can switch from thin provisioned disks to thick provisioned disks or vice versa without shutting down the virtual machine. For this lab, you should know the vSphere client user interface and you should be familiar with vSphere storage solutions. In the first task of this lab exercise, we will migrate virtual machine files from one data store to another shared data store. In the second task, we will combine vMotion migration of a virtual machine from one ESXi host to another ESXi host, and at the same time perform storage vMotion by migrating the files of the virtual machines from one data store to another data store. I'm sure I provided you enough good reasons to watch the following video on vSphere storage vMotion migrations. Now let's get started. We want to perform the configuration on vCenter server SA VCSA01. So the first step is to connect to this server. Then we log in as administrator at vSphere.local. In the first task, we want to move the virtual machine files of a virtual machine, Photon11, from its current data store called iSCSI data store to another shared data store called ICM data store. To do that, we have to go to VMs and templates in the navigator pane. We are already on that page. So let me expand and go into our ICM data center. And in here, in the folder lab VMs, we can find the virtual machine called Photon11. You can see that the virtual machine is up and running. And now we want to move the files of this virtual machine to another storage. So let's first check where the files reside right now. So in the summary tab on the right-hand side, we can scroll down to the related objects. And here we can see that the storage is the iSCSI data store. Now in the navigator pane, I right-click the virtual machine. And here we select Migrate. Then we choose the option to change storage only. We don't want to change the compute resource in this case. We click Next. And now we have to select the destination data store. And we want the files to be migrated to the ICM data store. Note that up here, you can select the virtual disk format. And by default, it says same format as source. But you could select a different virtual disk format here, which means this is where you can configure switching from one disk format to another disk format. Let's assume the original disk was thin provisioned, then we could now select a thick provisioned disk, lazy zeroed or eager zeroed. In our case, we don't want to change the format, so we leave it at the default and we click Next. Now we review our settings, then we click Finish. And under the recent tasks down here, we can see that the relocation of the virtual machine has been started. We see the status and we see the progress. Now we wait for this migration to finish. And as we can see, relocating the virtual machine completed. And when we look at the related objects now in the Summary tab, we can see that the data store changed from the iSCSI data store to the ICM data store. So the virtual machine files have been moved already. The virtual machine is still running and the files now reside on the new data store. Now in the next task, we want to migrate both the compute resource and the data store of this same virtual machine. So first, let's have a look at the ESXi host that this virtual machine is currently running on. And as you can see, it's host SA-ESXi01. We will migrate the virtual machine to use the compute resource of ESXi host SA-ESXi02. And for the data store, we will migrate the data store, and actually we will simply switch back. Initially, it was on the iSCSI data store, then we migrated the files to the ICM data store, and now we will change the ESXi host and we will change the data store back to the ICM data store. So let's do that. We right-click the virtual machine in the navigator pane. We select Migrate. Now we use the last option here, where we say we want to change both compute resource and storage. Then we click Next. So we start with the migration of the compute resource with standard vMotion. And we have to select the destination ESXi host. And we want to migrate to SA-ESXi02. We click Next. Now we get to the storage vMotion part. We are currently using the ICM data store. And now the new target data store should be the iSCSI data store. Again, we won't change the format of the disk. So we simply click Next. Since we are migrating to another ESXi host, we have to make sure how to map the virtual NICs. So we select that VM network, that was the source port group on ESXi host SA-ESXi01. Should use the same name on the destination ESXi host. So in particular, in this case, VM Photon 11 will end up with its network adapter 1 in the port group called VM network. We click Next. Now we select the vMotion priority and we want to run the vMotion task with high priority. So we click Next. We review the configuration and we click Finish. And now the virtual machine is migrated from ESXi host SAESXi01 to host SAESXi02, and the virtual machine disk files are migrated from the ICM data store back to the iSCSI data store, where the virtual machine disk files were initially before we started the first migration in the first task. And we can see that vMotion migration to ESXi host SAESXi02 is done. And when we scroll down and we look to the data store, we see that the storage location now is the iSCSI data store. So the migration of the disk files is also complete. We don't need that VM anymore, so we can shut it down. I right-click the virtual machine in the navigator pane. I select Power, and then I choose Shut Down Guest OS. We confirm, and the virtual machine is now shut down. And that wraps up this lab. Congratulations! You have completed the vSphere Storage vMotion Migrations lab demonstration video. In this lab, we first used Storage vMotion to change the virtual machine disk files of our virtual machine Photon 11, and we moved the files from the iSCSI data store to the ICM data store. Then, in the second task of the lab, we performed a vMotion migration where we changed the ESXi host from SAESXi01 to SAESXi02, and at the same time we migrated back from the ICM data store to the iSCSI data store. This lab showed you how to migrate virtual machine files from one data store to another data store, and it showed you how to migrate both the compute resource and storage of a virtual machine at the same time. Whenever you want to perform maintenance of an ESXi host or of a data store, you have to move the virtual machines or the virtual machine files away from the ESXi host or the data store. Knowing how to do this in a non-disruptive way is an important skill, and you now know the necessary steps. Thank you for watching this lab demonstration video. I hope the knowledge acquired here will help you with your daily job assignments, and good luck as you continue your journey in VMware world.